expected you to acknowledge him,
Yeah.
the officer, but you weren't required to salute him every time you
Right.
saw him. While the ship was so small and you were
Yeah.
interacting, you're talking 300 people on a ship
Right.
that size, and you're kind of rubbing elbows a good
Yeah.
bit.
Yeah.
But, and that was, well, this was what we said, it was good duty.
Yeah.
It really was. Destroyers could go places other ships couldn't.
Right.
They shallow draft, only drew 14 feet of water.
Okay.
We could get into rivers and harbors and ports that other ships couldn't even approach. And
Now,
consequently, we got to see and enjoy a lot of places that other ships.
how many screws did you?
Two.
Did just two? Okay.
Two. Yeah. 60,000 ship horsepower.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow. That could move then.
Yeah, well, that's why, of course, it were steam-driven turbines, 4 boilers, and that's why when we were doing heavy operations, they call it, or full power, you were gobbling fuel oil as fast as the pumps could get it to the boilers.
Yeah.
It didn't take you very long on the other types like the Fletchers and the Sumners could only carry 143,000 gallons of fuel oil. When they were going hard at it, somewhere in the third day they were starting to look for
Yeah.
fuel,
Yeah.
tanker or your carrier. Your carriers were all equipped to refuel the destroyers, and they got quite adept at it.
Yeah.
And but now the Gearings, which was the type that I was originally assigned to, could carry almost 200,000 gallons of fuel oil, and that gave you an extra 2 days on station, which
Before you needed to
in the
refuel.
Pacific out there, the long distances, and they built these ships, I learned later, primarily in anticipation of
Invasion of Japan.
Japanese invasion,
Yeah.
and they needed a destroyer that could do what a destroyer does with some range, and
Right.
and so that's when this Gearing class came into, and I think they ultimately built 90 of them, and they carried the destroyer load in the Navy up to 50s, 60s, and early 70s. Matter of fact, the first ship I was assigned to, the 870 there, she was in commission until 1972, and was in Vietnam
Wow.
a couple of times. This class was the last of what they call the gunships.
Okay.
We had, the main battery was 6 5-inch guns, and I don't know,
Wow.
4 or 5 quad 40 millimeters, and
Yeah.
numerous
Yeah.
20 millimeters, depth charges,
Yeah. Yeah.
10 torpedoes.
Torpedoes. Yeah.
Korea raised quite a stink. And, of course, they called them cans, or were commonly referred to as cans or tin cans.
Yeah. Yeah.
The heaviest metal in the hull was 5/8 of an inch.
Wow.
And they laughingly, over the engineering spaces, talked about the armor, which was 3/4 of an inch. So it would,
Really?
it would barely stop a 50 caliber.
Yeah.
You know.
So yeah.
So they always referred to them as cans or
Yeah.
tin cans. Any destroyer. Of course, as far as I know, when they started building the Arleigh Burkes, they kind of lost what a destroyer was. I thought, but of course I'm kind
Prejudice.
yeah, well, I'm kind of nostalgic about that.
Nostalgic, yeah.
Well, even in Vietnam, of course, I was not involved in that, but I've read most of the stories about it.
Yeah.
The newer destroyers were guided missile destroyers. Consequently, they weren't able to defend themselves close in.
Interesting. Yeah.
So they always sent one of the old guys along with
Yeah.
the gunship
Yeah.
to take care of sampans and these little speedboats and all that sort of thing. These missiles were worth a darn against something like
Right.
that.
Right.
Of course, they finally started equipping them with the Gatling gun,
Right.
which
That'll take care of anything that.
yeah.
Yeah.
But that's not like stopping somebody out there a mile away or before he ever gets close to where it's going to be a threat to you.
So if they had battle stations, where did you go?
I was the main engine room.
Okay.
I was the upper levelman, they call it, in the main engine room. We had a chief, me, and we were kind of the exec. You do this, you do that, you take care of this. And sometimes I was in a damage control party, but mostly I was in the main engine room.
Yeah.
Of course, of which we had two.
Wow. So you were in essentially a total of about 7 years then.
Pardon?
You were in about 7 years?
Actually, on active duty, a little bit less than 6.
Okay.
I have credit for my original enlistment was 6 years.
Yeah.
I have credit, like I say, for pay purposes.
For
7 years,
7
11
years,
months,
okay.
and 29 days.
Okay.
That counted the 2 years that
That you were
I was a reservist.
Okay.
Yeah. And,
Yeah.
But
So were you inactive reserve, or did you have to go to monthly meetings with a particular
Inactive.
group? Inactive reserve.
I could have gone to active, and they even offered me a teaching post up at the Naval Reserve Center up at Wheeling, but I would have had to go on an active reserve and Army to kind of fix it.
She wasn't that excited about that.
She wasn't all that
yeah.
excited. Well, by that time we had Debbie, and by that time I was a bona fide civilian.
Yeah.
You know, I was too busy making a living and trying to do what a guy's supposed to do. You know.
Yeah.
It was. But as I say, that with those couple trips to the Far East, they can keep the Far East.
So you never
You
went back?
weren't too impressed.
I don't.
Yeah. It seemed like you were pretty impressed by the Japanese, but the Chinese.
Well,
did you get into Korea at all, or did you?
well, they were
Or I mean, there was.
first and foremost, they were dirty. I mean, physically dirty.
Yeah.
They, of course, I suppose it's part of the culture. What really struck me, you're talking to a country boy here that was never more than 75 miles away from home in his whole life.
Right.
And all this other training and these couple of years and stuff leading up to this Asiatic tour we took, pretty much people in the Caribbean, up and down the East Coast, West Coast some, couple of the islands in the Pacific, pretty tame. But you know, when you're anchored in a river and you have a dead body around your buoy chain, and when the boat crew goes to get rid of it, pray they don't puncture it. And
yeah, they stink.
while we were in Shanghai, of course, when a ship was visiting a port, they were expected to supply the police powers. When your crew was ashore, you were expected to supply a shore patrolman or enough to keep order. And while we were in Shanghai, I got assigned to Shore Patrol one day. Well, they paired us up with a person that was there in the garrison. The Australians and the British had a garrison in Shanghai at the time. And so we went ashore and I got paired up with my partner, and we left the station and were probably not more than, I suppose, 3 blocks away, and here was a body laying alongside the sidewalk. And apparently it'd been there a while. And of course, like I said, this old country boy pulled up short. And this guy was an Aussie. He said, don't let that worry you, mate. He said, you'll get used to it. I said, I don't think so. Well, he said, if you're going to be out here, you're going to see it, because they have about 2,000 unclaimed bodies in this city every week.
Cool.
People are so poor that they put them out like you put the trash out. And she said eventually the dead cart will come around and get them. And of course they had people that did this for their livelihood, I guess. And so, and it was
It's kind of a different culture, isn't it?
Yeah, it was only a couple of days later. I mean, this is not a very pleasant story to tell, and it doesn't keep you awake. But yeah, after a while, and as we all know, if you're in where there's a disagreeable odor, after a while you kind of acclimate to it and so on. Mm-hmm. But this was in August that we were there, hot, it was hot, and come this god awful stench, and the people that were topside went below to get away from it. The ones that were below went topside, and this barge was probably about 3/4 of the size of a coal barge, completely stacked full of bodies.
Wow.
Like cordwood.
Wow.
In all various stages of
decomposition
and bloating, and the channel there was kind of narrow, so they had to pass. They passed probably within 50 yards of us, and they were on their way. That was evidently their weekly trip to the open sea to dump various bodies.
Wow.
So like I say, but I tell people that the world out there is not a fairyland or Disney World. You better think about it a while. So like I say, we were very, very happy to get out of the river and back out to where the ocean was clean. We could wash the stink off the ship. But now, Reedy never did find out why we were there in the first place. If anybody ever said, I don't know. But inflation was rampant at the time. They wouldn't allow us to carry greenbacks or money ashore. We had to change it into Chinese yuan. At that time, the exchange rate was 450,000 yuan to $1. Now you can imagine trying to carry $5 worth of Chinese money in a sailor suit. Of course, we snuck a little ashore. You could always strike a good bargain with it. It was.
Now, what was your favorite place? Did you have a favorite port, or did you?
Well, Hong Kong.
Hong Kong.
Yes, and surprisingly enough, San Francisco was great. I don't agree with the politics, but like I say back then that wasn't an important thing. But I enjoyed San Francisco.
Yeah.
I enjoyed Seattle. I enjoyed most of the ports on the all except Norfolk. I didn't care for Norfolk. San Diego, beautiful
Yeah.
city. The destroyer basin there was very, very close to
Nice.
downtown. You could ride the bus, take the boat in and ride the bus uptown, and people treated you decent. It was. I didn't like Boston particularly, or
How was Brooklyn?
Brooklyn was okay.
Yeah.
Well, we were there. Of course, I had fortunate. I had an uncle who was a commander in the Coast Guard and lived in Manhattan. So.
Oh, okay. That makes things a little nicer. Yeah.
Uncle Stanley was quite the guy. He was a career
Coast Guard,
person in the
sure.
Coast Guard. He was in there for 33 years, and I was able to go ride the subway and go to Manhattan, and he and his wife, of course, treated me very nicely and
Great.
took me around and showed me where the good spots were, so. Yeah. I would say it was quite an adventure. I wouldn't have traded it for anything. Nothing, It gave me an education that
Yeah.
I could have not possibly have paid for growing up in a coal mining camp.
Just think about how much of the world you have seen, as opposed to 98% of the other people around here.
Oh yeah,
I've
been there.
You've been.
Seems
you've been
like
all
I've been
over the world.
everywhere.
Yeah.
So you said you grew up in a coal mining camp?
Yeah, raised in a coal mining camp. Yeah. Of course, we were fortunate. We were the fortunate ones. My father worked for Owens, Illinois glass company at the time. He ran a compressor station that pumped the natural gas to where they made the glass and the glass bottles and so forth and so on. And he was also the local automobile mechanic, electrician, whatever, he could do anything. So we weren't trapped in a coal mine thing, so to speak. But if you grew up in that situation, then you had a big choice if you wanted a job to go to work. You could go to the mines, to the mines, to the mines, or if you were lucky, maybe you could go to the mill. But my dad had opportunities to have excellent jobs in the coal industry, and he said no way. He didn't want anything to do with it.
Yeah.
He said, I don't have to do that, and I'm not going to do that. And of course, that was one of the reasons that he was so adamant about you get your high school diploma.
Yeah.
Because a lot of the boys, when they were in the 10th grade or just starting the 11th, their parents pulled them out. They put them to work on the farm, before they went into the mines with their dad, and they were allowed to do that then.
Yeah.
You could go to the mines with your dad when you were 16 years old, and you were earning $1 and so forth. My dad knew all this. This was his. I grumbled a little bit once in a while, but he had spoken and he was the boss. I respected his opinion, and I didn't want him mad at me.
Yeah.
So, but you see, this was a whole different time for no television, no cell phones, none of the things that people take
for granted today.
they take as granted. And like I say, the whole country was at war. Now, there was no question that the United States of America was at war and in a fight for their life.
And everybody did their part.
Everybody.
The victory gardens, the rationing, and
everything was rationed. And gosh, you could see the ingenious ways we managed to make tires last.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
And that sort of thing. But I kind of have a thing now. I don't know. It might not be a very popular view, but you know, right now this country's at war, and the military's at war. I'll put it that
Yeah.
way. And the rest of the country's at the mall. Now that's
you know,
about what it amounts to.
pretty much after they invaded Iraq back in 2003, President Bush said, "Okay, go back and just enjoy the rest of your lives, and we have a professional military now that you know, it's crazy. If we're going to be at war, we need to mobilize like we did."
Everybody. Yeah, I thought that was a bad move, stopping the draft.
Yeah. Well, I think that there should be some sort of national service. You know, it doesn't have to necessarily be a military thing.
I agree with that.
The CCC, I think, was one of the best things that ever happened to this
Armada
country.
had brothers in
Yeah.
the CCC.
Uh-huh.
That was how they got money for their families.
Yeah.
And they did so many.
Oh,
Many
all these
things.
great things. And there's great things that they could do now, and the infrastructure, you know, things that need to be done now. You know, do that. If you want it, Peace Corps, you could do that. If you're a doctor or something, you could serve an underserved area for, you know, a couple of years. There's all kinds of different ways you could, you know, serve your country.
Funny you should say that. I've always felt that a person ought not to be allowed to go directly from high school to college. I don't think they're smart enough. I don't think they're mature enough. As Tom said, a couple of years of some kind of service, then
because it gets them out of their little niche, you know, and gets them out into the world. And you're a great example of that. You know, consider how you were when you were in high school, and consider how you were 2 years later after you'd been in the Navy and seen some of the world.
Yeah.
Excuse me?
Well, the world and other people.
Precisely.
And a lot of the guys, the ones that enlisted and went, and while I was still in high school, 4 or 5 of my classmates already left, and prior to that, some of them before, and you know, some of them were killed, some of them were prisoners of war, and most of them that went into the military never came back to the coal mines. They went somewhere else. They did something else. They found out there was something else besides digging coal to get it. They went to Ohio. They went to work in the steel mills. They went to work in the automobile factories and whatever else, when all these things were good, viable industries. So it's a whole different world right now that the people nowadays could
don't give up hope.
not even relate to.
No.
You know.
Yeah.
We boys ran the creeks digging out old tires for recycling. Of course, they recycle rubber then. And you were lucky if you could find a stray nail laying around anywhere, because every boy worth his salt had his own little scrap pile.
Yeah.
Every once in a while, the junk truck would come around, and they'd load it up, and then these things were off to be melted down and made into whatever, planes, tanks, whatever things. You know. But it's in Armida's family. Her mother had 4 sons in World War II.
Really?
Yeah.
Wow.
And one of them was in the Battle of the Bulge. The other was a radioman on a B-17. When being on a B-17 over Europe, you only had about a 38% chance of getting home.
JoAnn has
and one of them had a ship sunk out from under him in the Pacific, and the other was in the Army. You know, it's just so. You know, we were kind of intimately involved with all this. It was, but as I say, there's a lot of things in the world today that I have trouble dealing with. I'm sure you can understand why.
Sure.
Yeah.